Hi, Emma Williams, and let me tell you a story. My story about betrayal, steel, and the sound of an engine that refused to die. They say family is everything, that blood runs thicker than water, but what happens when the very people who share your last name are the ones who dismantle you, piece by piece? I used to believe in building things. Machines, relationships, futures. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade, but in truth, I'm a restorer. I restore what's broken. At least I used to. Until one fall morning, I woke up and realized the thing I'd poured 5 years of my life into, the car my late father and I dreamed of rebuilding together, was gone, sold, betrayed, ripped from me not by strangers, but by the people who sat across from me every Sunday at dinner. My husband, his family, all of them smiling as they smiled every week, only this time they weren't just passing the potato. They were plotting behind my back. They thought I'd be quiet, that I'd cry in my garage, go numb and let it go. But grief, when stirred just right, becomes fire. And I don't just restore engines. I know how to ignite them. This isn't just a story about a stolen car. It's about how I took back my voice, my name, and my legacy. So buckle up, because what comes next isn't forgiveness. It's the sound of a woman reclaiming everything they thought they'd buried. And it starts with a 1967 Mustang. They didn't just sell my car. They stole my past and thought I'd stay quiet. It happened on a Tuesday. Not a thunderstorm, not a scream in the night, just an ordinary morning in Oregon. Sunlight stretching lazy across the cedar fence. Coffee cooling on the workbench. And me. Emma Williams, buffing a fresh coat of wax onto the Highland green hood of my restored 1967 Mustang. My sanctuary, my therapy, my father's voice preserved in chrome and steel. 5 years I'd poured into that car. After he passed, I'd spent every spare dollar, every sleepless night, every memory I had of us rebuilding under that garage light. I still remember him crouched beside me when I was 16, holding a rusted carburetor and saying, "You learn a lot about life fixing engines, Emma. Nothing teaches you trust like a clean rebuild." And then my phone buzzed. Diane Williams. Now let me be clear. My mother-in-law doesn't call early. Mornings are for family only, she once told me, with a perfectly polite smile that excluded me as clearly as if she'd drawn a line in the sand. So when her name lit up on my screen at 7:34 a.m., my gut twisted before I even answered. "Emma," she said, voice clipped and composed, "we're on our way. There's something we need to discuss." "About the car?" I blinked. "The car?" My fingers tightened around the phone. "What do you mean?" "It's better if we talk in person. Harold and I will be there in 20 minutes. She hung up before I could speak. Not that it would have mattered. With Deanne, the performance is already written. The rest of us just follow the script. I stood frozen in the garage, hand resting on the hood of the Mustang. The engine still warm from last night's test run. Something didn't sit right. The way she'd said the car like it was an object. Like it wasn't mine. I tried calling Douglas, my husband, but it went straight to voicemail, twice. A knot began tightening in my chest. By the time their silver Mercedes rolled into the driveway 17 minutes later, I hadn't moved an inch. The morning air had cooled. The Mustang gleamed in the light, and I stood with arms crossed, grease under my nails, dressed in a faded t-shirt and oil-stained jeans. Harold stepped out first, all forced warmth and country club confidence. "Beautiful morning, isn't it? What's going on with my car?" I didn't return the pleasantry. Diane stepped out next, cashmere draped just so, eyes scanning anything but me. "Perhaps we should go inside," she said, lips pressed into a smile too practiced to be sincere. "This is a driveway conversation," I said flatly. Harold cleared his throat. "The car isn't exactly yours anymore." The world tipped, just slightly. "What did you say?" "Douglas signed the title over to us last week. Everything's legal. The Mustang's been sold." No scream, no thunderclap, just Silence. I stared at them, unblinking. That's impossible. The title's in my name. I keep it in the safe. Actually, Diane said, finally meeting my gaze, Douglas had it changed to joint ownership months ago. For insurance purposes, you signed the paperwork. And in that moment, I saw it. A morning 6 weeks ago, Douglas handing me a stack of forms, catching me as I rushed out the door. Just routine insurance stuff, he'd said. Need your signature. And I, fool that I was, had trusted him. Because that's what marriage is supposed to mean. I stepped back, swallowing hard. Where's my car now? Sold, Harold said matter-of-factly. The new owner's sending his son to pick it up noon today. The Mustang. Gone. Sold out from under me. To who? I demanded. A friend of mine from the golf club, Harold said. Paid in cash. We needed it quickly for Jessica's retreat program. You sold my car for Jessica's next spiritual awakening? My voice cracked, rage and disbelief tangling in my throat. She's going through a very difficult time, Diane offered, eyes shimmering with faux empathy. And that healing center in Sedona doesn't come cheap. The air snapped. My blood boiled. You sold my father's legacy to fund her crystals and sage bundles? And that's when Harold, ever the patriarch, said the thing that finally snapped whatever thread of civility I had left. You're being emotional. It's just a car. No, it was never just a car. You're being emotional. It's just a car. That sentence hung in the air, sterile and smug, like a verdict handed down by a judge who never heard the testimony. I took a step forward, my voice low but trembling with the pressure of everything I'd been holding back. That just a car is the last thing I have from my father. The car we dreamed of building together. The one I hauled from a junkyard 3 states away and rebuilt, bolt by bolt. You didn't just sell a machine. You sold my history, my grief, my healing. Diane had the audacity to reach for my arm like I was some hysterical patient she needed to steady. I jerked away. Don't touch me! Emma, we know this is hard, she began in that syrupy tone reserved for funeral lines and family apologies that don't mean a damn thing. But sometimes family has to make sacrifices for one another. Funny, I snapped, 'cause somehow I'm always the sacrifice. Harold's face twitched. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is selling something that doesn't belong to you. Forging documents, draining our savings without a word. And all for Jessica, who changes spiritual callings more often than she washes her bed sheets. Diane gasped. Harold bristled. But I wasn't finished. You want to talk about family? I've been the one bringing desserts to every dinner, smiling through Jessica's passive-aggressive jabs and pretending like I belong in a house that's always made me feel like a trespasser. They exchanged glances. Then Harold said, The deal is done. You can't stop it. My jaw clenched. Watch me. I turned and stormed back into the garage. The Mustang sat there gleaming, as if unaware of the betrayal pulsing through its frame. I ran my hand over the fender, the curve of it, the perfect paint job that had taken me 3 months to perfect. My sanctuary, my armor. I pulled out my phone and called Douglas again. Voicemail. Then I called Ethan. Emma, he answered, groggy. They sold it, I said. They sold my car, without my consent. And they drained our joint account. There was a pause. Wait, what? That's not even... Are you okay? No, but I need to know... If I signed something under false pretenses, can I fight it? He exhaled. Maybe, if we can prove misrepresentation, fraud even. But you need to stop the sale from going through. Once it changes hands, legally it gets messy. I hung up, adrenaline buzzing in my fingertips. Outside, Harold and Diane were getting back into their Mercedes. Diane looked back at me through the window like she was watching a child throw a tantrum. I want you off my property, I said, voice flat. Emma, Diane tried. Now, or the next call I make is to the police. Something in my voice must have landed. They pulled out without another word. I stood there, breathing hard, heart racing, hands shaking. Back inside, I opened the safe. The title was gone. They'd planned this, all of it. The paperwork Douglas had shoved at me on his way out the door 6 weeks ago wasn't about insurance. He'd forged my trust, my name, and my future. I opened our online bank account. The balance stared back at me, $842.17. Last week it had over $150,000, 0 cents, withdrawn under a memo, family medical emergency. The betrayal was so layered it took a moment for my brain to process. Not just the car, not just the money, the intentionality of it all, the precision, the way Douglas had tiptoed through our marriage like a partner, all while gutting it from the inside out. My phone buzzed. Unknown number? This is Jack Peterson. My dad bought the '67 Mustang from Harold Williams. I'll be by around noon to pick it up with a trailer. The address I have is 317 Pine Ridge Lane, correct? My blood turned cold. My fingers hovered over the screen. I typed, "This is Emma Williams. The sale is not what it seems. Please delay pickup. I need to resolve something first." 3 dots blinked. Then, "Sorry, already on the road from Seattle. My dad said everything's signed. Is there a problem with the car?" I hesitated, then responded, "Not the car, the ownership." Silence. And then another buzz. A second message. Also from an unknown number. "You think this ends with the car. You're not ready for what's next." I stared at the screen, frozen. It wasn't from Jack. It wasn't from Douglas. Who the hell was watching me? The worst betrayal isn't from strangers. It's from the ones who called your family. I should have known this wasn't just about a car. By the time I pulled into the Williams estate, Veronica and Raymond's colonial mansion nestled in the manicured hills of Lake Oswego, I was no longer just Emma, the woman clinging to a stolen vehicle. I was a woman who'd finally stopped pretending. And this house, this place where every family dinner felt like a silent test I was always failing, was the scene of every lie I hadn't dared name. Until now. I parked my Subaru in the circular driveway directly behind Douglas's Audi. So he was here, hiding. The Williams house looked the same as always, symmetrical, tasteful, and cold. White siding, black shutters, a wreath on the front door that changed seasonally with surgical precision, home curated to impress, yet devoid of warmth. No one met me at the door. No surprise, I let myself in. The foyer smelled like eucalyptus and lemon furniture polish. Somewhere down the hall, I heard the faint clink of dishes and the low hum of voices. The kitchen, of course. It was always the kitchen, the sacred space where Veronica held court, where every family matter was discussed over herbal tea and passive aggression. I followed the sound. And there they were, Veronica at the stove, stirring what smelled like her signature chicken and wild rice soup, as if someone hadn't just gutted my entire life. Jessica leaned on the island, manicured nails tapping her phone, looking irritated with the world. And Douglas, sitting at the bar stool, head in hands like a man waiting for a verdict. They didn't notice me at first. Or maybe they did and pretended otherwise. I watched, for a second Jessica rolling her eyes at something Veronica said, Douglas murmuring something indistinct, and I realized something I'd never admitted before. They didn't fear consequences, as they never thought they'd face them. "Glad to see grief hasn't interrupted lunch," I said. 3 heads snapped up. 3 faces registered something between guilt and annoyance. Douglas stood so quickly his stool toppled backward. "Emma, save it." Jessica crossed her arms. "You just let yourself in?" I figured I had that right, considering my husband is hiding in his childhood bedroom while my life falls apart. Veronica wiped her hands on a monogrammed towel. Emma, this isn't the place. Oh, I think it's exactly the place, I said, stepping fully into the room. We're all here. Everyone who orchestrated the theft of my car, my savings, I trust. Don't be dramatic, Jessica muttered. Dramatic? I laughed. You really have no idea what you've done, do you? Douglas stepped toward me, palms out. Look, I didn't mean for it to happen like this. You forged my signature. No, he said quickly. You signed it. The title transfer. It was with the insurance packet. You told me it was for premiums. You lied. Veronica cut in smoothly. It wasn't a lie, Emma. It was a strategic omission. Douglas was trying to avoid upsetting you. Strategic omission, I repeated. That's what we're calling it now, Jessica rolled her eyes. You're making such a big deal over a car. That did it. It was my father's car. My voice cracked against the marble backsplash, the only thing I had left of him. And you sold it like a lawn chair at a garage sale. Veronica sighed. Jessica needed help. You don't know what she's been going through. Enlighten me. She's dealing with residual trauma, depression. Her therapist said the Sedona retreat was vital. She needed $48,000 to do. Yoga in the desert? Jessica scoffed. You think it's about yoga? That's exactly the problem. No one in this family respects my healing process. I'm not part of this family, I snapped. You've made that clear since day one. Douglas tried again. Emma, please. You sat next to me for years, knowing how much that car meant. You heard the stories. You watched me scrape and sand and bleed over that engine, and you still let them take it. I didn't know what else to do, he said quietly. You could have told me the truth. He looked away, and there it was, the silence that had always lived in this house. That trained silence, the kind that smiles politely through betrayal, that excuses control as protection, that rewrites pain as obligation, but not anymore. I had Ethan on standby. I had copies of the title, the bank statements, and Jack Peterson would be arriving in less than half an hour. It was time to shift gears. Douglas stood there, wringing his hands, eyes darting between his mother and me like a boy caught between playground bullies. We didn't think it would go this far, he mumbled. I folded my arms. You thought I'd cry and let it go. Jessica, still perched on the island, snorted. Honestly, yeah. I turned to Veronica. You taught them that silence is strength, that being polite is more important than being honest. Veronica didn't flinch. Emma, we didn't steal anything. We did what needed to be done. For whom? Jessica? I shot a glare at her. How many jobs have you quit this year? How many callings have you discovered and abandoned the moment real work appeared? I'm an empath, Jessica said coolly. Not everyone fits your rigid, industrial little world. I bit down on my tongue. Hard. This wasn't the time to scream. I needed clarity. Leverage. Action. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the counter. Read this. Douglas picked it up. Jack Peterson? His father bought the Mustang. Jack's hauling it down from Seattle. He'll be at the house today at noon to take it away. Jessica blinked. Wait, today? Veronica's lips thinned. Well, that was fast. You think? I said, voice rising. You all moved like clockwork to gut me financially, emotionally, and legally, and now, congratulations, the truck's already halfway to my driveway. I walked to the sink and braced my hands against the counter. I could feel the tile's coolness beneath my fingers, grounding me. Stay calm. Don't give them more than they already took. You have two options, I said slowly, turning to face them. Option one, you call Harold and tell him to cancel the deal, refund the money, and stop this transaction before it goes any further. Douglas swallowed. And option two? I file a police report claiming fraudulent misrepresentation and begin legal proceedings to invalidate the title transfer. Yes, I signed something, but I didn't know what I was signing, and that matters. Veronica stiffened. Emma, don't be ridiculous. Being exact, Jessica slipped off her stool. You'd really go that far? Over a car? This isn't about a car anymore. It's about how disposable you all think I am. Douglas stepped forward, voice hushed. Emma, come on, think about what this means. Dad already spent the money. The retreat's non-refundable. The center won't let her reschedule. Not my problem. You're my wife, and you're the man who betrayed me with a pen and a lie. Silence again. That horrible Williams brand silence that filled every space in this house. You need time to think, Veronica said carefully. You're angry, rightfully so, but rushing to burn bridges... I'm not burning anything, I interrupted. You already set the fire. I'm just walking out of the house. Jessica walked toward me, her face suddenly pale. You don't get it. If I don't go, I lose my spot. I need this, Emma. This retreat could change everything for me. I looked her square in the eye. Then, maybe next time, try changing without stealing someone else's soul to do it. Jessica flinched, and for the first time since I met her, she didn't have a snarky comeback, just silence. Douglas broke the tension. Even if we wanted to stop it, the money's already moved. The car's technically Jack's father's property now. I narrowed my eyes. Robert Peterson. That's his name, right? Douglas nodded. Interesting, I said. Because Robert has a post in the Pacific Northwest Mustang Forum, dated yesterday, bragging about the deal. He called it the steal of the year. Said he plans to flip the car at Barrett Jackson for $90,000. Ring a bell? Veronica's face froze. Jessica blinked. Wait, he's reselling it? Exactly. So let me get this straight. You didn't just sell my legacy. You undervalued it for a friend who's about to make nearly double. Douglas's jaw worked uselessly, like he was chewing on a confession he couldn't swallow. You were played, I said. All of you. Harold thought he was being clever. Instead, he handed my soul to a hustler. I picked up my phone and stepped back. I'm giving you one last chance to make this right. Veronica's voice dropped to that glass-cutting softness she used when the mask finally slipped. Don't do this, Emma. If you force our hand, we won't hold back. I met her stare without blinking. Neither will I. The moment stretched. Then Douglas's phone buzzed. He pulled it out, eyes scanning the screen, and paled. What? Jessica asked. He looked at me, then back at the others. Dad says Jack's almost there. 20 minutes out. My phone buzzed too. Unknown number. Just past the bridge. GPS says 18 minutes. Should I pull around back or park in the front? I read the message, then looked up. Spine straight, breath steady, game on. If I can rebuild a car from rust, I can rebuild my life from betrayal. By the time I got back to my house, my hands weren't shaking anymore. They'd taken everything. My car, my money, my trust. But they hadn't taken me. Not yet. Not the part of me that knew how to fight smart. Not the part my father taught to solve problems with grit, precision, and timing. I pulled into the garage, shut the door behind me, and leaned against the cool steel frame of the Mustang. The paint still shimmered in the filtered light. It was pristine, untouched. For now. But every minute brought that trailer closer. My phone buzzed again. Jack Peterson. 17 minutes out. Should I back into the driveway? I didn't respond. Instead, I walked into my office and opened my filing cabinet, pulling out the folder marked Restoration Project Mustang. Inside were photographs, receipts, invoices, scribbled notes in my father's handwriting, pages of oil-stained memories and evidence. Then I reached into the bottom drawer where I kept a backup USB containing years of progress photos, videos, and technical specs. If I was going to make someone understand that this wasn't just a car, I needed to tell the whole story. And sometimes The only person who'll listen is a stranger with a conscience. Back in the garage, I grabbed a clipboard and started organizing. Photos of the junkyard wreck I'd bought. Pictures of me grinding off rust, installing the rebuilt 390 V8, me lying on my back on a freezing concrete floor, aligning the suspension by hand, and then the final images, chrome shining, paint gleaming, the smile on my face, tentative but proud. I printed a copy of the purchase invoice too, the one with my name on it. Not mine and Douglas's, mine. Then I checked the Pacific Northwest Mustang Forum one more time. There it was. Robert Peterson's post snagged a gorgeous 67 Fastback Highland Green. Full rebuild, minimal miles. Golf buddy's son-in-law needed to liquidate fast. Got it for $48.00. KE, planning to flip at Barrett Jackson next month for $90.00. K plus. Some people don't know what they have. Attached were 4 photos of my garage, of my car, of my history. I printed that too. I had my evidence. Now I needed time. So I texted Jack, "Hey, just so you know, there's been a bit of confusion about the car's paperwork. Can we talk when you arrive?" He responded within 30 seconds. "No problem. I'll call when I'm 5 minutes out." I exhaled and sat down at my father's old workbench. The red toolbox still bore his initials in white paint. TM. Thomas Mitchell, my father, my teacher, my quiet anchor in a life that had rarely offered me solid ground. I stared at it, feeling his presence settle over me like the smell of engine grease and sawdust that still lingered in the drawers. You rebuild. You don't run. You fix what's worth fixing and walk away from the rest. The doorbell rang. I froze. Too early? But it wasn't Jack. Through the camera monitor, I saw a delivery van, FedEx. I opened the door. "Emma Williams?" "Yes." The driver handed me a small brown envelope, had me sign a tablet, and left without another word. I closed the door and examined the package. No return address. Inside, a single printed screenshot. The forum post. Same one I'd just seen, but with one detail underlined in red. Golf buddy's son-in-law. Underneath, someone had scribbled in pen, "Ask Harold what other assets he's been liquidating." There was no signature, no explanation, just a whisper from the shadows. Someone out there wanted me to look deeper. I sat down slowly. If Harold had done this before, if Douglas wasn't his first puppet, there could be more. More stolen assets, more wives blindsided, more strategic omissions. My phone rang again. "Jack," I answered, trying to steady my voice. "Hi." "Hey, I'm 5 minutes out. Trailer's a little wide. Mind if I use the side driveway?" "Sure," I said, "but when you get here, before we do anything, I need to show you something." The sound of the trailer's tires crunching over gravel brought a lump to my throat. I stepped out into the driveway, the folder tucked under my arm, my heart thudding like pistons in misfire. Jack Peterson climbed out of the truck, late 20s, denim jacket, Seahawks cap, boots caked in road dust. Not what I expected. He looked more like a contractor than the son of a wealthy car collector. "You Emma?" he called, eyes scanning the property. "I am," I said, extending a hand. "Thanks for driving down." He shook my hand politely, but kept his tone guarded. "My dad said you had some concerns?" "More than a few," I replied, holding up the folder. "Would you come take a look at this before we go any further?" Jack glanced over at the garage. "Look, I don't want to get involved in any drama. I'm just here to pick up what was paid for." "I'm not asking you to intervene," I said, "just to see the full picture. Then you can decide for yourself." He followed me inside with a kind of wary curiosity, the way someone might enter a stranger's home that smells faintly of gasoline and memory. I set the folder on the kitchen table and opened it. Photos, receipts, blueprints, my name on the purchase invoice, and finally the printed post from the Mustang Forum. He leaned over, silent as he flipped through the pages. "You rebuilt all of this?" he asked quietly. "Every bolt, every panel. Damn!" He flipped to the last page, the one where his father bragged about the deal. His expression changed. You know he planned to flip it? Now I do. Found that post last night. Guess he didn't tell you. Jack scratched his jaw, visibly uncomfortable. No, he just said it was a classic restoration and you were okay with the deal. I wasn't. I had no idea the car was being sold. It was transferred out of my name behind my back. He looked at me for a long moment, then exhaled. This car means something to you. It was my father's dream. He died before we could build it together, so I built it for both of us, and now it's being used to cover someone else's mistakes. Jack nodded slowly, thumbing the edge of the forum printout. I get it. Me and my granddad rebuilt a Chevelle when I was in high school. Still have it. Wouldn't sell it for anything. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was weighty. Heavy with the kind of respect that doesn't come from words but from shared experience. Calloused hands, long nights, the scent of oil and loss. He cleared his throat. Look, legally, I'm just transport. I can't cancel the sale. But I can delay it. I looked up, startled. Delay? He shrugged. Takes a while to position the trailer just right, especially with a tight turn radius. Could take an hour, maybe more. Gives you time to make some calls. Maybe your lawyer can stall things longer. Relief swept through me like a fresh breath of cold air. Thank you, I said. That means more than you know. He gave a short nod and headed back outside. I'll text my dad. Just let him know there's a hitch I need to double check. He won't like it, but he'll live. I watched him walk back to the truck, his shoulders slightly hunched like he was already bracing for his father's inevitable rage. Back inside, I grabbed my phone and called Ethan. Tell me you've got something, I said. I might, he replied. I spoke to a colleague who specializes in property fraud. If Peterson's purchase was commercial, if he knowingly bought the car under questionable circumstances with intent to flip, it changes the equation. Could even help us build a bad faith case. But can we act now? Not fast enough to stop the transfer, unless Peterson agrees to delay it voluntarily. I hung up and stared at the ceiling, letting the familiar pressure of urgency settle between my shoulder blades. If I couldn't stop the sale legally, maybe I could still stop it morally. I went back to the folder, pulled out the forum post again, and stared at the highlighted sentence. Golf buddy's son-in-law. Who else had Harold helped? My phone buzzed. Unknown number, text only. You're not the first, and Harold isn't finished. If you want the full story, ask about July 14, 1994. I froze. That wasn't a date I recognized. Not my birthday, not Douglas's, not my father's death. But the fact that someone else was watching, someone who knew, meant this ran deeper than a stolen car. I stared at the message, heart thudding, a new realization sinking in like frost under the skin. This wasn't about one betrayal. This was about a pattern, and I had just cracked it open. Some battles are fought in silence. Others begin in a warehouse full of strangers and secrets. I never imagined that one day I'd drive 5 hours north, not to reclaim a car, but to reclaim myself. The rain started somewhere past Olympia. Fat drops hitting the windshield like they kept something personal against me. I kept the wipers on high, the heater humming, and the Mustang's original keys gripped tight in my right hand like a talisman. I wasn't going to use them today, not yet. But just holding them felt like a small declaration. I'm not done. And neither is she. Seattle's industrial district appeared under a gray sky and power lines, block after block of chain-link fences and graffiti-tagged loading docks. I pulled into the lot just after noon. Peterson Restorations. A squat metal building with a discreet keypad entry and 2 enormous roll-up doors. No signage, no flair. Just cold, confident silence, the kind of place that didn't need to advertise because the right people already knew. Jack met me at the side entrance, clipboard in hand. He's inside, he said. I told him you were bringing paperwork. He didn't seem thrilled. I followed him in. Inside, the space opened up like a cathedral for gearheads. Spotless floors, fluorescent lighting, and rows of classic American muscle cars, each in various stages of rebirth. I spotted a 72 Charger, a 68 Corvette Stingray, and a black GTO on the lift. The Mustang sat in the center, gleaming beneath a soft cover like a sleeping beast. Robert Peterson stood next to her, tall, silver hair combed back, stiff posture that came from decades of being told yes. He looked up as we approached. "Mrs. Williams," he said, offering a firm but unenthusiastic handshake, "you've caused quite a stir." "That tends to happen when people sell my property without asking." He raised an eyebrow. "Your husband and in-laws represented the car as jointly owned. The paperwork was clean. The title was in both names." "And now you know it wasn't an honest deal," I said, handing him the folder. He flipped through the contents methodically, photo evidence, signed receipts, even a printout of his own online brag. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "I'm a businessman," he said when he finished. "My concern is whether this vehicle will be tied up in a lawsuit when I try to auction it next month." "It will," I said plainly, "unless you work with me." "You want me to cancel the sale?" "I want to buy it back. On terms." A pause. Jack looked at his father, then at me, then back again. Robert exhaled. "And why should I do that? I got a hell of a deal." I met his eyes. "Because you know what this car is, not just its engine specs, not its resale value, what it means, what it represents. You had a father once, too." He didn't answer right away, but his jaw tightened. "I'll think about it," he finally said. "Give me until the end of the day." I nodded, and then the front door slammed open. "Where is she?" I didn't have to turn around to know that voice. Veronica's heels echoed like a gavel on concrete. Behind her came Douglas, trying to look neutral and failing miserably, and Raymond, stoic, smug, always just one step from calling in a favor with a judge or a board member. Peterson raised an eyebrow. "I didn't realize this was a family affair." "It shouldn't be," I said. "There, not part of the contract." Veronica marched toward us. "We trusted you, Robert. You told Harold this was a clean deal." "And I was led to believe the same," Peterson replied coolly. "But it appears your family didn't tell me the whole story." Douglas stepped forward. "We don't want trouble, okay? Just finalize the pickup and let's be done with this." I turned to him. "You're just worried someone's going to connect the dots." Raymond narrowed his eyes. "What dots?" I stepped closer, pulled the crumpled note from my jacket pocket, the one that had arrived anonymously. I unfolded it and read it aloud. "You're not the first, and Harold isn't finished. If you want the full story, ask about July 14, 1994. Raymond blanched. Douglas froze, and Veronica actually looked afraid. I held their silence like a weapon. "July 14, 1994, I repeated, folding the note slowly, deliberately. "That date means something to one of you, or maybe all of you?" Veronica recovered first. "That's nonsense. A distraction tactic. You're spiraling, Emma." But her eyes betrayed her. Not panic. Recognition. Douglas looked stunned, like he'd just stumbled into a movie where he didn't know the script anymore. Raymond, however, stood perfectly still, jaw clenched, hands tightening behind his back, like he was resisting an instinct to command the room. Peterson glanced between us, clearly interested now. "What happened on that date?" "No idea," Douglas mumbled. "That's not what your face says," I shot back. "So here's how this is gonna go. Unless one of you wants to tell the truth, I'll find out myself, and when I do, I'll make it public." Veronica turned to Robert, shifting gears like only a woman with decades of practiced manipulation could. "Robert, this deal is legitimate. Don't let her emotional theatrics complicate things. The car was transferred legally, whatever family drama this is. I'm not and this isn't drama. This is fraud." I looked back at Peterson. "But I think you already know that." You just need to decide whether you want to profit off of it or do the right thing. The room fell quiet. Just the ticking, the sound of a nearby clock, the faint hum of a hydraulic lift somewhere in the back. Peterson rubbed the bridge of his nose. You're asking me to walk away from a $40,000 0-cent flip? I'm asking you to walk away from becoming complicit in a long-running scheme. Jack stepped forward quietly. Dad, you always said we don't touch anything shady. This feels shady. Robert gave him a sharp look, but didn't correct him. Give me your number, he said finally to me. Let me talk to my lawyer. I'll let you know by tomorrow morning. I'll be waiting, I said, handing him a card. Veronica scoffed. Well, you've certainly made a scene, Emma. What now? You think Jack's going to tow the car back to your garage out of pity? I didn't answer her. I didn't need to, because something else had caught my attention. Raymond. He hadn't said a word since I read the note, but his eyes weren't on me, they were on a photo. Tucked just behind the counter near Peterson's desk was a framed image of a classic Mustang at auction, probably from a past Barrett-Jackson event. In the background was a crowd, hundreds of people, but Raymond was staring at it like it was radioactive. After the room thinned, Jack leading Peterson out back for a quiet talk, I walked over to Raymond. You were there, I said. That day. Whatever happened on July 14, 1994, it's tied to a car, isn't it? He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. I'll find out, I told him. Even if I have to dig through every title transfer in Oregon, every VIN registration. I'm not just fighting to get back what you took last month. I'm going to uncover everything. Douglas pulled lightly at his father's sleeve. Let's just go. But Raymond didn't move. Not right away. Veronica, icy as ever, placed a hand on his shoulder. We don't owe her anything. Let's leave this place and be done. Raymond turned. Just before walking away, he looked me square in the eye and said softly, You think this started with your car, Emma? You have no idea how long we've been lying to you. And with that, they left. The air in the shop felt different now, like something had been cracked open. Jack returned, expression unreadable. My dad's not saying no. Not saying yes either. No, but he told me to have the trailer ready, just in case. I exhaled slowly. I didn't have the car yet, but I'd stalled them, rattled them, and most importantly, I'd gotten something they never intended to give me. Doubt. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. New email from unknown subject, 1994. Attached, a scanned death certificate, a birth record, a property transfer deed, and one photograph. The photo showed a baby in a hospital blanket being held by a woman I didn't recognize, but the name on the wristband was unmistakable. Emma Williams. Some truths aren't buried in graves. They're buried in paperwork. I sat in my car for over an hour, parked on a quiet street 3 blocks from Peterson Restorations, staring at the email attachment like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. 4 documents, 1 photo, and none of it made sense, except deep down it did. The kind of sense that comes only when something you've always felt but never proven finally takes shape. I opened the photo again. A newborn wrapped in white, cheeks flushed, eyes still shut to a world that wouldn't be kind. A nurse stood smiling in the background. The woman holding the baby wasn't anyone I recognized, but the hospital bracelet on her wrist said, Emma Williams, not the name of the mother, the name of the child. Me. The file name, July 14th _1994 transfer UPL. I clicked on the deed next. A modest single-story home in Eugene, Oregon, transferred on July 14th, 1994, from a Barbara Whitlock and Associates, a legal firm that, according to the footer, no longer existed. Then the death certificate. Barbara Leanne Williams died July 15th, 1994, 24 hours later. Cause of death, complications following childbirth. And finally, the birth certificate. No father listed, just one name scribbled in clean blue ink beside mother. Barbara Leanne Williams ran a shaking hand down my face. All my life, I'd been told my mother died in a car accident when I was 2, that she and my biological father had left me in the care of distant relatives, that Veronica and Raymond Williams had adopted me when I was 4. A story told with quiet tones and long pauses, the kind of story people use when they want you to stop asking questions. But this told a different story. I wasn't orphaned at 2, I was born into silence. And someone, likely someone named Williams, had made sure the paper trail went cold after July 15th. My phone buzzed again. A known number. You're close? But you'll need more than a birth certificate. The clinic shut down in '95, but someone still has the files. Attached. A name. Dr. Raymond H. Lassiter, retired OB/GYN, former director, Mercy Hills Women's Clinic. Last known address, Yakima, Washington. Of course it would be a ghost town lead. I Googled the name, found a single archived article about rural clinic closures in the late '90s. No social media. No office, just a white page with a beige thumbnail from a university alumni newsletter. He was 74 now if he was still alive. And yet, I knew I'd go. Because what I held in my hand wasn't a simple mistake on a birth form. It was a piece of a lie that had shaped every interaction I'd ever had with the people who raised me. A lie that explained the distance, the favoritism, the looks, exchanged over dinner tables and never explained. And maybe, just maybe, it explained why they were willing to destroy me now. Because if the truth came out, it wouldn't just take down Harold and Veronica. It would unravel an entire legacy. I started the car, heart pounding, eyes still blurry from what I'd seen. As the engine hummed beneath me, steady and familiar, a single question echoed in my head. Who the hell am I really? The drive to Yakima was long, flanked by bare fields and skeletal trees stripped clean by autumn. With every mile, the truth felt less like a puzzle and more like a reckoning. Somewhere at the end of this road, a man knew who I was. Or who I wasn't. I'd called ahead, twice. No answer, no voicemail. Just an address pulled from a digital obituary of someone I prayed wasn't already buried under the same lies I was trying to exhume. The house was modest, tucked at the edge of an apple orchard, white paint peeling in places, a swing hanging lopsided on the front porch. It looked like a place time had forgotten, and maybe that's what drew me in, how easily truth can rot in silence. I knocked. No response. I knocked again, harder this time, just as I raised my fist for a third try. The door creaked open from the inside. A frail man stood there, stooped, eyes sunken but alert behind thick glasses. He looked at me for a long time without saying a word. "Dr. Lassiter?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "You heard daughter?" The words hit me like a slap. "Whose?" "Barbara Williams," I nodded. He stepped aside. "You'd better come in." Inside smelled like lemon oil and old paper. The walls were lined with file cabinets, bookshelves, and a fireplace that hadn't been used in years. Dust motes drifted lazily in the sunlight. We sat at a worn wooden table. He poured tea from a kettle, hands trembling slightly. I waited, not trusting my voice yet. "She was scared," he said quietly. "Not of being a mother. Of them. The family. She said they'd never accept you." My throat tightened. "She died the day after I was born." He nodded. "Hemorrhaged. It was fast. We tried." "And then what?" "What happened to me?" His hands rested on the table, frail but steady now. "They came for you the next morning. 2 men in suits. Said they were family. Showed me a document. Temporary guardianship. Signed by Barbara's brother. They said it was what she wanted, that you'd be taken care of." My blood ran cold. But she never signed anything like that, did she? She didn't even have a brother, he whispered. That's when I knew. He stood slowly and walked over to a rusted filing cabinet in the corner. After rummaging through the folders for a minute, he pulled out a thin manila envelope and returned to the table. I shouldn't have kept this, but I did. Inside were copies, a carbon-copied form, of the forged guardianship, a note from Barbara, handwritten, dated July 13, stating she wanted to raise her daughter alone, and one more document I hadn't expected. A letter addressed simply, "To my baby girl, Emma." I froze. My name in soft cursive ink. "I never mailed it," Lassiter said. "Didn't know where you ended up, but I read it once, and I knew that if you ever came looking, I had to give it to you." My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. "My Emma, I don't know if I'll be here when you read this, but I want you to know that you were wanted. You were loved. Every kick, every flutter, I felt you growing, and I dreamed of our future together. I wasn't afraid to be your mother. I was afraid of what they'd do to stop it. If they tell you I left you, don't believe them. If they tell you I was weak, remember this: I chose you, even if the world didn't. Love, Mom." I pressed the paper to my chest, holding back sobs that had waited 29 years to be heard. When I finally looked up, Lassiter was staring at the fireless hearth. "There's more, isn't there?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "You were taken. That's the word for it, even if the signatures said otherwise. And you weren't the only one." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. 2 months before Barbara died, another girl, same story. Poor, no family support, baby vanished into a private adoption. But that time, the mother didn't make it either. I leaned forward. "Do you know who was behind it?" He looked straight at me. "I think you do." Before I could press him, the sound of tires on gravel cut through the air. We both turned. A black SUV was parked outside, tinted windows, no plates. Dr. Lassiter's voice dropped to a whisper. "You shouldn't have come alone." There's a sound an engine makes right before it gives in or breaks free. I was ready for both. The SUV idled outside for 11 minutes, long enough for me to memorize its silhouette, the flicker of a movement behind the tinted windshield, and the number of heartbeats I counted between my own breaths. Dr. Lassiter didn't speak. He didn't need to. The look on his face, tight-lipped and pale, told me everything. Whoever was out there wasn't just here for intimidation. They were here because the story was cracking and I had picked up the hammer. I slipped the letter from my mother into my jacket pocket, tucked the forged guardianship papers into my folder, and stood. "I have to go." Lassiter didn't stop me, but as I reached the front door, he said quietly, "If they follow you, don't drive home. Drive somewhere noisy, public. Let them lose you in the chaos." I nodded once. Then I stepped outside and walked straight to my car, never once looking toward the SUV. My fingers didn't stop shaking until I was 3 miles out of Yakima, speeding down Route 82 with the windows cracked just enough to let the fall air sting my cheeks. I kept checking the rear view 3, 4, 5 times, but the SUV never followed, which made it worse. It meant they knew I had what I needed and they weren't rushing to silence me. They were planning something slower, more careful. It was nearly midnight when I finally pulled into my drive. The Mustang was still in the garage, still untouched, but now it felt different, less like a symbol of what was taken and more like a weapon waiting to be used. Inside, I found an envelope on my kitchen table. No return address. Inside, a copy of my real birth certificate. This one listing a father. Name, Raymond Williams. No mother listed. My stomach dropped. They hadn't just taken me. They had rewritten everything. My fingers hovered above the name, Raymond Williams. He wasn't just my adoptive father. He was my biological father. Suddenly, the years of coldness made more sense. And none at all. That strange duality I always felt with him, the unspoken tension, the way he avoided calling me daughter unless someone else was listening. He hadn't raised a child, he'd hidden one. I sank into the kitchen chair, the real birth certificate shaking in my hands. This wasn't just about inheritance, about a car, or even betrayal anymore. This was about identity. Blood. A crime buried under decades of legal paperwork and family lies. Veronica knew she had to. That's why she always watched me too closely. That's why she smiled like every interaction was a performance, and why she hated it when I got too curious. I opened my laptop and started typing. First, I scanned every document. My mother's letter, the forged guardianship form, Lassiter's clinic notes, the photo, and now the real birth certificate. Then I compiled a timeline. Birth, death, transfer, lies, and finally, I attached everything in an email to Ethan. Subject, you are Gent, final evidence, DNA, title fraud, illegal adoption body. Ethan, I have everything and I need your help filing within 48 hours if something happens. To me, this email is my insurance. Forward to the DA and the Oregon Board of Family Law. Don't wait. M. I hit send. Then I did something I hadn't done since my father died. I opened the garage, climbed into the Mustang, and started the engine. It roared to life, low, guttural, alive. The kind of sound that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that announces its return. I drove, not aimlessly. I had one destination left, the Williams estate. They had taken everything they could. Except this final truth. Except the choice I was about to make. 20 minutes later, I parked in the circular driveway, headlights pointed straight at their front door. The house was dark, but I knew they were home. I stepped out, folder in hand, heart pounding. Then I heard it, gravel crunching behind me. I turned. Another car pulled up, the driver's door opened, and out stepped Jessica, her expression blank, her eyes glassy, and in her hand, a gunka.